It's a pleasure to see everyone here, and it's also a pleasure to see some new faces as well. Coming to Lebanon has a number of benefits. One of them is I get to spend time with Marwan, who works in Washington. I work in New York, so I end up seeing him more here than I do in the United States. So this is a pleasure for me. And Marwan is one of our stars and most talented people, so I'm always happy to have time to spend with him here. So, as Marwan said, we have a fairly limited amount of time to cover some of these issues. We thought what we would do in the limited time we have here is try to, first of all, talk about what the objectives of this project were when we gathered 6 months ago. I'll say just a few words about myself to start, especially for the new people. My name is Chris Walker. I work in New York at Freedom House, principally on the research and analytical work that we do. So that's in the variety of things that Freedom House produces. I focus my efforts on exactly the sort of things that we're doing here in these sessions. So my work focuses on the reports that our analysts produce looking at issues of governance, women's rights. We've done projects in the recent past looking at transparency and accountability, elections, political rights and civil liberties. We produce now, I think, a total of 5 annual multi-country reports looking at, in 2 instances, the entire world. We look at 195 countries in our political rights and civil liberties review. We also do this in our press freedom review. In several other instances, we look at a smaller group of countries. Governance, we look at a group of middle-performing countries. We look at the countries of the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe in another project. But the model we use is fundamentally similar in terms of the methodologies we create and the ways we do this. And in many ways, what we've discussed here have been what sort of application of these ideas and methodology would make most sense for your purposes in creating a report of this kind. Why is a report of this kind important? Why are we doing this? There are many reports that are produced on the sorts of issues we're discussing, on human rights issues, on press freedom, and all of them fill some sort of role to one degree or another in the public debate or in the understanding of these issues. I think the reason your work is important here is because you have a unique position. You're in Iraq, you have the sort of sense and understanding and expertise that outsiders simply can't have. No matter how smart they are, no matter how well they may know the issues or how well they may think they know the issues, you have a very unique position. Working in your own field of expertise, being on the ground in the country. So this, I think, really affords a report of this kind, looking at a set of issues, a very special opportunity, because you can speak with local authority, you can speak with a voice that's informed by your own experience. What we set out to do was to try to create a project and a model that would be systematic. That was one of the objectives, that we look through a set of issues. We'd be able to do something that was logical in terms of what sort of issues and concepts were settled on. We did this in a very ambitious way. We discussed this when we met last time. Just to put this in perspective, when the group gathered in June and we spent several days together, we in essence accomplished something that Freedom House and other groups that create these sorts of methodologies take many weeks to do, and sometimes even longer in terms of the level of discussion with experts, the level of back and forth once a draft is prepared. So I really have to commend all of you for the work that went into this when we met in June, and your efforts to finalize the methodology after we left each other. Then it was really quite an accomplishment in a very, very short period of time. I'd also say that this notion of creating a report that looks at very big and complicated issues like governance, like transparency. It's not very easy. It requires an ability to prioritize, to think about what you believe are the most important dimension of these concepts. I think one of the things we discussed was you rarely have a perfect or a uniformly agreed to definition of many of the concepts we discussed. So if you talk about governance, for example, or democracy, and you look at the political science literature, or you look at the definitions that the World Bank might use, it's rare that you find any sort of definition that everyone says, that's the perfect definition, that everybody agrees on. There's always a question or a different perspective, and what we sought to do when we met in June was to make sure that the sorts of questions that we included in each one of the concepts that we created was a sound and a reasonable, is the translation okay? Yeah. Okay. Was to make sure that whatever questions and elements were created to help define this idea of transparency or governance, that everyone was comfortable that it was actually reaching that definition, because you can have very clear and well-intentioned disagreements on what these concepts mean. So again, I think the fact that you were able to settle on a set of terms and definitions that were very, very good, that got to the heart of these issues, and that were clear, was really quite an accomplishment. So that was really the main objective of the last meeting, was to settle on the sorts of issues that you felt were priorities to be examined in the context of governance and transparency issues in Iraq today, and to do it in a way that was workable, which is also critical. I think the sorts of projects I've been involved with over the years that look to create a model to examine these sorts of issues, there's always a challenge of not trying to be too perfect or trying to be too specific. And the challenge is to find the balance between having a methodology and approach that is both easy enough to use so that it's practical, but detailed enough so that it actually adds value and insights. Nobody wants to read something that they can read all over the place easily in other ways. They want to read something that gives them some new information and some insights. When you have limited time, limited resources, there's always a challenge to create something that both works in practical terms, but also avails meaningful information to audiences that are interested in these issues. So if someone picks up a Freedom House report like Countries at the Crossroads, which looks at democratic governance issues, our ambition is that the reports are, of course, accurate, that the reports are coherent, that they're actually looking at democratic governance issues and people would feel comfortable with the definitions we have, but that they also add value, that the experts who create these reports have provided something that tells the world a little bit more, for example, about the rule of law or transparency in Lebanon. So I think we used the Lebanon country report when we gathered last time. It was a very, very good report. We had Osama Safa, the author of that report, who's based here in Lebanon, come in and do one of the sessions. Our hope is that when we craft this report on Lebanon, that people who follow the country, people who are interested in these issues, will look at it and say, okay, it makes sense both in terms of the way it's crafted, the way the concepts work, but it also tells me something about what's happening in Lebanon that I might not have known before. Or it provides some details that explain beyond the basic sort of things that you might find in other places, that give more insights into what's really happening in whether institutions are working in Lebanon, in whether they hold each other accountable, and what some of those examples might be. So for Osama Safa, who's here, who knows the country very well, he did a very good job in his report of explaining the framework, explaining how the laws work, and then giving examples of how this works in practice.